The morning Winifred Bogle chose her pearl earrings, she had no reason to believe it would be anything other than an ordinary Thursday in early April. She stood before the mirror in the bedroom of her Scarborough bungalow, the same house she had owned for 30 years, the same mirror her late husband had helped hang the weekend they moved in, and smoothed the front of her navy blazer the way she had smoothed her nursing scrubs for 41 years at North York General, deliberately, with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who understood that how you carried yourself was a form of respect, both outward and inward. She was 66 years old, retired now, 18 months. Her natural hair, close-cropped and silver gray, had completed its transition sometime in her late 50s, and she had decided, around that same time, that she liked herself better this way. There were lines around her eyes that the years had written with some authority, and she had stopped arguing with them a long time ago. What remained was something harder to name but easier to feel. A steadiness in her expression, a warmth in her eyes that every patient she had ever cared for on every difficult night had recognized and been quietly grateful for. The pearl earrings were her daughter's gift 3 Christmases back. She kept them in the velvet box on the second shelf of her jewelry case and saved them for occasions that deserved something intentional. That Thursday, the occasion was Eunice Carrington's 70th birthday. She did not know, pulling on her blazer in the quiet of that Scarborough morning, that across town, in a glass-walled room 42 floors above the financial district, her daughter was wrapping up a presentation that would end abruptly in 11 minutes. Though neither of them could have said, in that moment, what would cause it to end. Eunice had been Winifred's closest colleague through the final 15 years of her nursing career. Steady, sardonic, brilliant, the kind of woman whose absence from a shift made the entire ward feel slightly out of alignment. They had retired within 6 months of each other, and they still met every third Tuesday for lunch at the Jamaican place on Eglinton that served the closest thing to home cooking either of them could find in Toronto. Eunice's birthday fell that Saturday, and Winifred had decided weeks ago that she wanted to give her something beautiful, something from Harwick and Elfie, the luxury department store on Bloor Street in Yorkville, because Eunice had once mentioned, almost in passing, that she had always found their silk scarves lovely, but had never quite let herself spend that kind of money on one. Winifred took the subway. She preferred the subway when she was going downtown, liked the particular democracy of the platform, the way the city compressed itself into those carriages and sat alongside itself. She arrived at Bay Station just after 10 o'clock, emerged into the bright April morning, and walked not 4 blocks west along Bloor with the unhurried ease of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. Harwick and Elf occupied 3 floors of a pale limestone building on the north side of Bloor, its windows dressed with understated displays, a single cashmere coat on a mannequin, a scatter of leather goods on mirrored shelving, the kind of visual restraint that communicated wealth by refusing to try too hard. The doorman held the door as Winifred approached. She thanked him. He did not quite meet her eyes. Inside, the store was cool and quiet, the way expensive places always were, as though the temperature itself had been calibrated to communicate that everything within it required consideration. Winifred made her way toward the accessories floor, pausing briefly to look at a display of winter bags she had no intention of purchasing, simply because they were beautiful, and she saw no reason not to appreciate beautiful things. A sales associate near the handbag wall glanced up, assessed her in approximately 2 seconds, and looked back down at her tablet. Winifred noticed. She had been noticing that particular look in various iterations for 66 years. She did not slow her step. She found the scarves on a long glass-topped table near the center of the second floor. Folded lengths of silk in deep jewel tones, each one tagged with a small cream label. She selected 3 that she thought might suit Eunice and held each one up toward the natural light, coming through the tall front windows, the way her mother had taught her to examine fabric when she was very young and fabric still needed to last. She had been standing there, perhaps 8 minutes when the store manager arrived. His name was Barrett Lowell. He was 43 years old and had managed the Harwick and Elfie Bloor location for 7 years. Long enough to have developed a set of instincts he trusted absolutely and examined almost never. He walked with the particular authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed in a contained space, and he arrived at Winifred's side with a smile that did not reach anything above his cheekbones. "Can I help you find something?" he said, in a tone that made the question feel less like an offer and more like an inquiry into what she was doing there. "I'm just browsing, thank you," Winifred said pleasantly. "I'm looking at scarves for a friend." Barrett nodded once, slowly, and did not move away. A moment later, the store's security guard, a broad-shouldered man in his late 20s named Colton, materialized at the edge of the accessories floor with the air of someone who had been signaled rather than coincidentally arrived. He positioned himself near the end of the scarf table, arms loosely crossed, in a way that was meant to appear casual and did not succeed. Winifred set one of the scarves back on the table, smoothed it carefully, and selected another. She was aware of both men. She had been aware of both men since the moment the second one appeared. She continued her deliberation with the unhurried focus of a woman who had spent 4 decades making careful decisions in high-pressure environments, and was not about to be rushed in a silk scarf department. "Ma'am," Barrett said after another minute had passed, "I'm going to have to ask you to present a receipt for any items you've handled." Winifred looked at him. "I haven't purchased anything," she said, her voice even. "I've been looking." "Store policy," Barrett said, the corners of his mouth hardening into something that was not a smile and had never intended to be one. "For high-value merchandise." "I see." Winifred folded her hands together in front of her, the gesture unconsciously echoing 40 years of bedside manner. The posture of someone who had learned to remain composed in rooms where composure was the only tool available. "And is this policy applied to all your customers browsing the scarves, or specifically to me?" The question landed in the air between them, with a clarity neither man was prepared to address directly. Barrett took a half-step closer. "I'm going to need you to come with me," he said. "I have not done anything wrong," Winifred said, clearly, firmly, loudly enough that the couple browsing handbags 12 feet away stopped and looked over. "I am a customer in this store. I have a right to be here." A woman near the elevator pressed a hand against her mouth. A teenage girl in a winter coat had already raised her phone slightly, then lowered it when Colton glanced in her direction. What happened next took less than 90 seconds and would be replayed, in fragments and in full, for days afterward. Colton stepped forward and placed his hand on Winifred's arm. Not gently, not with any pretense of asking, and Barrett moved to her other side, and together they walked her toward the front door with a brisk, practiced efficiency that left absolutely no room for argument and no space for the witnesses in that room to do anything but watch. Winifred did not struggle. She did not raise her voice. She walked between them, with her spine straight and her head level, and her pearl earrings catching the store light the same way they had caught the bedroom mirror an hour before. And she said, once clearly as they passed the doorman, who still would not quite look at her, "I want the name of your corporate office. I want it in writing." They deposited her on the sidewalk in front of the store. Barrett said something about trespassing. Colton said nothing at all. The door closed between them, and Winifred stood on Bloor Street, in the April cold, her blazer neat, her earrings in place, her hands at her sides, and for a long moment the ordinary Thursday morning moved around her as though nothing had occurred. A woman who had seen everything through the window stepped forward from the sidewalk, her eyes wide and upset. "Are you all right? Do you want me to call someone?" Winifred looked at her for a moment. Then she reached into her handbag, withdrew her phone, and called her daughter. Across the city, in the 42nd floor offices of Tessara Technologies in the South Core, Amara Bogle was wrapping up the final 10 minutes of a board presentation. She had delivered a version of approximately once per quarter for the past 6 years. The room was glassed in and bright, the table long, the faces around it, composed in the particular way that senior executives composed themselves when numbers were moving in the direction they had hoped, but they were not yet willing to show that they were pleased. Amara was 41 years old. She had founded Tessara in her second bedroom in Rexdale at 27, with a laptop that overheated in cold weather and a savings account her mother had contributed to, with a check she could not entirely afford to write. The company was now among the 10 largest privately held technology holding firms in the country, with portfolios spanning fintech, health tech, logistics software, and, as of 8 months prior, a majority stake in a luxury retail group called Harwick Holdings. That acquisition had made the business press for about a week before being overtaken by other news, and Amara herself had authorized it in a meeting that lasted less time than it took to drive across downtown in morning traffic. She had built Tessara without announcing herself, without profile pieces and press releases until the company's scale demanded them. Without the particular performance of ambition she had always found exhausting in people who confused noise for progress. Those who worked alongside her closely described her as exact. Exact in language, exact in expectation, exact in the kind of calm that settled over her in difficult moments the way other people's calm deserted them. She called her mother every other day and visited most Sundays, sitting in the small backyard of the Scarborough bungalow with a cup of tea and the easy quiet that only certain relationships allow. Her phone buzzed against the table with her mother's name on the screen. She let it ring once. She almost never took calls mid-presentation, then looked at the time. Her mother called in the evenings, not at 10:30 on a weekday morning. She picked it up. Winifred's voice was calm. It was the thing that frightened Amara most. How calm her mother's voice was, the same steadiness she had always maintained in hard moments, which meant that something genuinely hard had occurred. "I'm fine, baby," Winifred said first, because she always said that first. "I'm outside Harwick and Elfie on Bloor. The manager and security removed me from the store. I wanted you to know what happened." Amara was already standing. She said 3 words to the room. "We'll continue Monday," picked up her jacket from the back of her chair, and walked to the elevator. She drove north in a way she did not remember deciding to drive. The traffic on Bay Street was the usual gridlock, and she navigated it with the same precision she navigated everything, her hands steady on the wheel, while something behind her sternum rearranged itself into something harder and colder than what had been there before. She thought about her mother's voice. She thought about the pearl earrings. She had chosen them 3 Christmases ago, because she knew Winifred would save them for days that mattered, and she knew her mother had worn them today, because that was the kind of woman Winifred Bogle was. Someone who put on her best earrings when she was going somewhere she considered worth respecting. She thought about all of this and said nothing aloud, and arrived at the corner of Bloor and Bay in 11 minutes, which was not enough time and also too much. She found her mother on the sidewalk in front of the store. Winifred was standing with the composed stillness of someone who had been waiting without allowing herself to appear to wait, her blazer buttoned, her posture, the posture of a woman who had spent 4 decades refusing to make herself smaller in difficult rooms. There was a mark, faint, already developing, along her upper arm where a hand had gripped her, and when Amara saw it, she stopped walking for exactly 1 second before crossing the remaining distance between them. She took her mother's hands in both of hers and said nothing. For a moment, only looked at her. Winifred looked back with the expression Amara had known her whole life. The one that said, "I'm all right, and I know you're angry, and please don't do anything rash," all in the space of a single look. "Tell me what happened," Amara said quietly. Winifred told her. All of it, clearly, in the order it occurred, without embellishment, and without softening. She described the look from the sales associate, the manager's arrival, the impossible receipt demand, the grip on her arm, the walk to the door. Her voice remained level throughout, and that levelness, cost her something Amara could see even if Winifred would never name it. When she finished, Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked her mother to wait on the bench at the corner and to call her if anything changed. Winifred studied her daughter's face, the way she had studied it since it was 8 days old, and agreed. Amara walked back to the front door of Harwick and Elfie and pushed it open. Inside, the store was exactly as it had been, cool, quiet, curated. Amara crossed the floor to the manager's station near the back wall, where Barrett Lowell was speaking quietly to a junior associate and radiating the particular satisfaction of a man who believed he had handled a situation correctly. He looked up. His expression settled into the same professional neutrality he had offered Winifred, maybe slightly less of it. "Hi," Amara said. "I need a moment." "Of course. How can I help?" "The woman you just had escorted out of your store was my mother," Amara said. "I want to understand, from you directly, what reason you had for doing that." Barrett's expression shifted, not to contrition, but to a kind of fortified annoyance, the look of a manager who had already decided he was in the right and found questioning tiresome. He referenced store policy. He referenced high-value merchandise. He referenced, obliquely, the word discretion, in a way that was not oblique at all. Amara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded once. Then she took her phone from her jacket pocket and dialed. It was not a long call. She gave a name, a location, and a single instruction. "I need Harwick Holdings Regional Director, Legal, and HR at this address in the next 15 minutes. Barrett heard enough of that to change his expression entirely. The next 12 minutes were the longest of his professional career. He attempted, twice, to ask Amara who she was calling. She did not answer either time, and her refusal to answer was somehow more authoritative than any response could have been. Colton appeared from somewhere near the staff corridor, took one look at the quality of the silence filling the floor, and did not move any closer. The first car arrived in 14 minutes, then a second. A woman in a charcoal suit crossed the floor with the brisk, purposeful step of someone who had been interrupted mid-task and had not minded because this was more important. She stopped in front of Amara and extended her hand. "Ms. Bogle," she said, "Regional Director, Harwick Holdings. We came as quickly as we could." The name, Bogle, landed on Barrett Lowell the way a file lands on a desk when someone drops it from height. He had read the acquisition news 8 months ago. He had not connected the last name to the woman standing in front of him in a plain jacket, without announcement, without a single marker of the world. She occupied 42 floors above the financial district. He connected it now, with the particular, sickening precision of a man watching the full shape of his error reveal itself all at once. Amara Bogle, founder and CEO of Tessara Technologies, which had acquired Harwick Holdings 8 months prior, in a deal covered in every business section of every major newspaper in the country, which meant that the woman in front of Barrett Lowell owned this store, owned the building, owned the brand, owned his employment contract. Amara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She asked the regional director to pull all available footage from the past 90 minutes. She asked HR to begin documentation immediately. She asked legal to review the relevant policies against what the footage would show. She did all of this clearly, without ceremony, in the middle of the accessories floor, where everyone remaining in the store could see it happening. Then she walked back outside to the bench at the corner and sat down beside her mother. "It's being handled," she said. Winifred looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Did you eat breakfast this morning?" she asked. Amara stared at her. Then she laughed. A real one, involuntary. The kind that surfaces when the tension has been enormous, and then suddenly isn't. "Mama." "I'm just asking," Winifred said, and patted her hand. The footage was reviewed by end of day. It was unambiguous in the way that only footage can be, removing every variable that either man might otherwise have introduced into an account of events. The camera above the scarf table showed Winifred handling each piece with careful attention, replacing each one neatly, behaving in no way that distinguished her from any other customer browsing the floor. It showed Barrett arriving without being called. It showed Colton's positioning. It showed the grip on Winifred's arm. It showed the door. The regional director viewed it that afternoon with two members of Harwick Holdings' legal team, and the viewing lasted approximately 7 minutes before she closed her laptop and asked for both men's access badges. Barrett Lowell's employment was terminated that evening. Colton was suspended pending a full HR review that concluded 3 days later in his own termination. Both received written notices outlining the specific policies their actions had violated and no offer of severance beyond what was legally required. A company-wide communication went out to all Harwick and Elphi locations the following morning, announcing a mandatory retraining period on non-discrimination and customer service standards, effective immediately, with sessions to be designed in consultation with community advisors. The story reached local media by the following afternoon, carried first by a journalist at a Toronto outlet who had obtained the footage through a source she declined to name. By evening, it had reached national broadcast. The footage of Winifred being walked to the door, her spine straight, her blazer neat, her pearl earrings catching the store light, was played on 3 separate news programs in 12 hours, and the reaction it generated arrived with the particular swiftness of something people had been waiting to respond to without a clear occasion. Several community organizations requested meetings with Harwick Holdings. A professor of retail management at the University of Toronto wrote an op-ed about institutional profiling in luxury retail that was argued over in comment sections for the better part of a week. The mayor's office issued a statement. Amara declined every media request. She did this consistently, without hostility, through a single brief note from her communications team, stating she had no comment beyond what the company had already communicated publicly. The note's last line said that the matter was her family's business before it was anyone else's, and that she intended to keep it that way. What she did not decline was the request, made by a neighborhood coalition 2 weeks later, for Winifred herself to speak. The gathering was held in the community center 3 blocks from Harwick and Elf on a Wednesday evening, a modest room, chairs arranged in a half circle, most of them filled by the time Winifred arrived. She came in her navy blazer. She wore the pearl earrings. She had considered, briefly, wearing something different, and then decided against it, because she was not in the habit of letting other people's behavior determine how she dressed. She stood before the room with her hands loosely folded and looked out at the faces, which were various and attentive and waiting. She did not begin with what had happened. She began with Eunice Carrington, with the story of a silk scarf she had never actually purchased, and the friend who turned 70 that past Saturday, and the lunch they had anyway at the Jamaican place on Eglinton. And the way Eunice had laughed when Winifred told her the whole story from the beginning. The real full laugh that Winifred had spent 30 years learning meant Eunice was genuinely amused rather than politely so. She said I should have bought the scarf anyway before they walked me out, Winifred said. And the room laughed, and the laughter released something. Then she was quiet for a moment. I have been a nurse for 41 years, she said. I have held people's hands in the hardest hours of their lives. I have sat with families while they received news that would change everything. I have worked nights and double shifts, and shifts I finished crying in my car in the parking garage before I drove home. Because some days the weight of other people's pain is something you can only carry as far as your car, and then you have to set it down. She paused, and in 41 years, I was never once asked by a patient to justify being in the room. The room was very still. What happened to me on Bloor Street was not new, she said. It was not exceptional. It was an ordinary thing that happens to people who look like me in spaces that have decided, quietly, without writing it down anywhere, that we don't belong there unless we can prove otherwise. I know that. Most of us in this room know that. She looked out across the faces, taking her time. What I want to say, she continued, is that I chose, after what happened, not to spend my energy on the two men involved. They made a decision. Their decision had consequences. That is as much thought as they deserve from me. She let that settle for a moment. What I want to spend my energy on is the question of what comes next. Not for me. For whoever walks into a room after me and shouldn't have to prove themselves before they're allowed to look at a silk scarf. She had spoken, she explained, with the Harwick Holdings director and with the advisory team now being assembled to design the retraining program, and she had made one suggestion she felt clear about, that the program include not just policy and procedure, but stories, real people, real accounts of what it felt like to walk into a room and be assessed before you opened your mouth. She wanted managers and staff to sit and listen, genuinely listen, to those accounts, the same way she had sat with patients for 41 years and listened without deciding in advance what she thought she heard. You cannot train empathy into a checklist, Winifred said, but you can create conditions where people are asked, regularly and seriously, to consider someone else's experience. That's all I'm asking for. I think it is a reasonable ask. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. And then it began to applaud. Not the polite kind, but the kind that starts somewhere in the chest. In the back row, Amara stood with her arms loose at her sides. She did not applaud immediately. She stood looking at her mother for a long moment, and what was on her face was not the expression of a CEO or a founder or the owner of anything. It was the face of someone's daughter, watching her mother be exactly who she had always been, in exactly the way that had cost her the most and mattered the most, and finding, to her own mild surprise, that she had to work to hold her composure. She applauded eventually, longer than anyone else in the room. The advisory program launched 6 weeks later. Harwick Holdings brought in 4 community organizations, 2 of which Winifred helped identify, and the sessions began at the Bloor location before rolling out to the remaining 11 stores in the chain. It was named, by the advisory committee without consulting Winifred in advance, the Bogle Standard, a name she accepted with the same quiet, slightly reluctant grace with which she had accepted most things in her life that she had earned without asking for. Barrett and Colton did not return to retail management. Their names became, in the way these things sometimes went, cautionary references in training materials, stripped of identifying detail but unmistakable to anyone who had followed the news that April. On a Sunday evening in late May, when the Toronto spring had finally stopped, pretending it was still March, Winifred sat on the back porch of her Scarborough bungalow with a cup of tea and her daughter beside her, the same 2 chairs they always sat in, the same faint drift of her neighbor's lilac bush from 3 fences down. The yard was small and particular. The raised herb bed along the back fence, the bird feeder Amara had installed 3 Novembers ago, that Winifred had initially called unnecessary, and then spent the following winter watching with consistent attention, the patch near the back steps where the grass had never quite grown right, and both of them had long since made peace with it. For a while they sat without talking. This was a comfortable thing between them, the kind of silence built over decades of Sunday evenings that looked more or less like this one. Then Winifred said without preamble, "I bought Eunice the scarf." Amara looked at her. "When?" "The following Monday, I went back." "You went back to the same store?" "It has a very good scarf selection," Winifred said simply. The new interim manager was extremely polite. And the associate on the accessories floor was quite helpful, actually. She sipped her tea. Eunice cried when she opened it, said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had given her in years. Amara was quiet for a moment, looking out at the yard. "You're something else, Mama," she said. Winifred made a small sound that communicated everything it needed to. She set her tea down on the arm of her chair and looked sideways at her daughter. This daughter who had been born in this city, raised in this house, gone out into the world and built something that had genuinely astonished Winifred, though she had never quite said so aloud for fear of embarrassing either of them. "You were always going to come," Winifred said. It was not really a question. Yes, Amara said, always. Even if you hadn't owned the building. Amara looked at her, especially then. The bird feeder swayed in the evening air. Somewhere down the street, two children were arguing about something in the way. Children argue when the argument is about nothing, and the evening is too fine to go inside. The lilac drifted over the fence again, more strongly now, and the porch light above them clicked on automatically against the deepening sky. Winifred reached over and took her daughter's hand. Her pearl earrings were still in. She had never gotten around to removing them after church that morning, and they caught the porch light, the same way they had caught the bedroom mirror that April morning, deliberately, without apology, exactly as intended. She held her daughter's hand and watched the yard settle into the familiar shape of evening, and she thought about Eunice's face when she opened the scarf and about the young woman on the advisory committee who had told her after the first training session that she had finally found words for something she had felt for years but never known how to name, and about the small, unremarkable fact of being here. In this yard, in this city, in this body that had carried her through 66 years and was not yet finished. She thought it was, on balance, a very good life. The evening settled fully around them, unhurried and ordinary, exactly the kind of evening that feels most like peace, when you have just come through something that briefly made peace feel uncertain, and both women sat in it without rushing, the way people sit in something they have learned, recently and at some cost, to value.